And here to do that is Curime Batliner. I'm sorry if I uh, devalued that name. He's an artist, an architect, and educator, and his work has been exhibited at Design Miami, Metropoli, Museo Nacional de Arte Mexico, and he has worked with such brands as Creative Artists Agency, Oblong Industries, TBWA, and his design research is published at the ICRA-IEEE, International Conference for Robotics and Automation, as well as Robots in Architecture. And he's a faculty and researcher in the Robot House at SCI-Arc, the Southern California School of Architecture. Prima Batliner.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for having me here. As introduced, my name is Prima Batliner, and like many others tonight, I stumbled into what I'm doing today. But I started off as an architect and really became interested with robotics as I was interested in the intersection between digital and physical spaces. And so again, like many others tonight, I tell stories, I build technologies and experiences, and operate often as a designer, somewhere engineer, tinkerer, software developer, sometimes in teams of many or sometimes in teams of one. So I really want to thank for the invitation tonight and the task which was given to me to speak about the history of robotics. Given the panel tonight and also kind of the in-depth knowledge of all the speakers, I took the liberty to slightly pivot from this and go more for telling stories about robots, knowing that many of the speakers will infill some of the juicy details of what have happened in the past, but also filling us in about the amazing developments which are happening today. I don't want to start about recognizing the moment we've been today. We all chime in via Zoom as we are like asked to stay at home due to a pandemic. And with all the downsides it comes, it is important to recognize that what was possible, that despite all these downsides, we have maintained a certain level of productivity in life, which would have been unimaginable in previous times. And this is in many parts due to the developments which have taken place in the past 7 years, and also in large part to robotics. So on the top left, we see a kind of robotic cell, which is used in the development of medical vaccines and other medical substances. On the top right, we see a warehouse from Amazon, which helps workers to move product to them and from them, which then pack the products and ship them to us. On the bottom left, we see a cell from Tesla, which is manufacturing cars, almost fully automated. And then also on the bottom right, we see an image from a building which uses automation technology to increase its efficiency to capture solar energy and produce the energy we use today. And while many of these technologies for a long time have been behind hidden walls, we have in the past years seen increasing them coming into the wild. And so Uber in many ways already with its drivers has been some sort of an automated robot, which obviously once with self-driving technology will be fully realized. But then we can also see how law enforcement and military uses robotics to kind of disarm bombs, or how farmers use drones to monitor the crop or deploy pesticides to kind of keep them healthy. And then of course, since like 60 years or something, we have left the planet and we've relaunched plans to kind of conquer the universe. And all of this would be not possible without robotics and computers. And so with this, seeing all these shapes and kind of applications, the question comes, what is a robot? And so many of us or few of us have encountered one. I would say it's more than half than think they have. And it has to do with certain ideas which we have from pop culture, which have been shaped through the stories we tell and the movies we watch. And so the concept of the robot goes back quite some time. And we can go back to Aristoteles, which put the quote, if every tool when ordered, or even of its own accord, could do the work that benefits it, then there would be no need either of apprentices for the master workers or for slaves of the lords. So already back then, almost 2,000 years ago, he describes a relationship which has to do with work, but also with class. And so it sets up certain terminologies and stories which have obviously reoccurred through movies and so on. And so when we look at what the robot is or what robotics is, it is useful to kind of look through different lenses. One of terminology, one of the concept, then through the stories we tell, the technologies we have developed, the applications we use them, the shapes they take, the relationships they have with us and another, as well the software which drives them, and then the intelligence we develop. And so without going too much into obviously larger topics of politics and organizations and how they relate in culture, let's first figure out the term robot goes back to 1920. It comes from a play, Rossum Universal Robots by K. Capek, which critiqued in a way the phenomena of serfdom, which was an institutional system where peasants were forced to provide labor in exchange for like occupying land or housing. And so in this play, he describes a new working class, which were robots, which were tasked to kind of execute work which humans didn't want to do. And then towards the end of the play, the robots revolt against the human creators. And after killing most of them, they realized that it wasn't the best idea, because one of the last kept secrets of the humans was their ability to make more of them. But anyway, it kind of sets some of the anxieties which we see in many of the movies which have come afterwards, where like the created kind of revolt against the creator, which is a theme which is also like a robot in popular movies later on. The apparatus itself is also quite old, or the idea of it. So in like already 1495, the Automata Cavaliere by Leonardo da Vinci is in some ways the first robot where it has like the skeleton inside, and with pulleys and little wheels, it can actuate the body of, in this case, the armor. And on the right side, we see the Schachtürke, which was in the 1800s, which is kind of this fake device or the fake intelligence where you could play chess against the machine, but in reality, there was a human sitting inside, which also kind of goes into a theme which was discussed more in the last episode of this event, but also is important to robotics in this way. So then in 1942, Asimov, important science fiction writer, described the 3 laws of robotics, which is very important in many of the kind of pop culture movies later on. So it sets up the game, meaning, so it writes about the first law, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. And then the second law, a robot must obey any orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And then the third law, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. And so it really sets up, and this is the selection of movies which have guided us to the 20th century or the 21st, but we see like R2-D2, which we later on, we're hopefully gonna hear more in some ways, HAL 9000 in Space Odyssey, like a super intelligence, iRobot, which in many ways is kind of a replica of the idea of robot, the Terminator, which was even our governor, and then WALL-E, which is kind of like a more friendly creature. The stories we tell around these technologies are in many ways very important because they often become reality. And so when we look at the top left, we see a snippet of like Boston Dynamics, which just released this video of their latest army of robots, which in many ways seemed to be science fiction not so many years ago and are now reality. Or on the top right, we see Sophia by Hansen Robotics with one of her creators, which resembles in some ways the machine itself. And she's like the first robot with a citizenship. And then on the bottom, we see more production robots. On the left, kind of a hard joint robot, 3D printing, and on the bottom, a Yumi robot, which allows for collaboration with humans. So really what, who, why, how, will they, can we trust them, are questions which through answering them, we come closer to the idea of what a robot really is, was, and is. So I know I haven't really perfectly defined it in a way, but it's an evolving subject and so on. And so as we move forward in time, it is important, especially when we recognize the moment today, that we look at these topics like automation and autonomy, operation and agency. So while for most part of the 20th century, robots mainly were about automation, the displacement of labor or the replacement of labor, more and more, and the repetition of one operation, and more we see robots which take on certain autonomy, which can be recalibrated and have a certain agency in the processes they're tasked to do. And so one way I like to think about robots is more as this machine, which is less defined through its body, but more to do what it does. And so in some ways, or in many ways, it's a set of sensors which allow to kind of recognize its environment and how it stands there. It has a certain intelligence which it can kind of act upon this information it gathers. And then it has actuation devices which allow to kind of interact with its environment. And so this relates to space and of course software. And we will hear a lot about software today, but really like what started as this kind of things behind walls now and objects more and more are actually becoming this kind of machines themselves which encapsulate space. And we will later on see how they're also being explored in kind of the artistic spaces. So without too much into that, but tonight is mainly going to be like a talk about actuated, articulated robots. And I don't want to take too much time of the speakers later, so I'm going to like rush through this. But in 1957, the animation robot was the first, the concept of an actuated robot was invented. In 1961, it was implemented in the first factory of General Motors. Then in 1973, the KUKA robot, first 6-axis robotic arm, which in some ways that we're going to see many of them tonight. And then I also want to recognize the importance of many of the artists which have shaped of what we think today about robots. The Sinister robot in 1971, which was an interactive installation where you could yell at the robot, essentially, it would interact with you. Then, of course, the Dijksterflex camera in 1976, which we're going to hear more about it for Star Wars. And then Autopoiesis by Ken Ronaldo in 2000, which is an installation about many robots interacting with its environment, which somehow relates to what we're going to see later doing NVIDIA in kind of simulation environments. So just before we dive to the end, I really, while many of the beliefs and ideas of what robots are today come from these movies, I really want to put us the lens on for tonight that these are machines which have tremendous capacity to augment us, reshape on how we interact with them, and really like unlock types of creativity which we have not seen before. And I really look forward through this lens to learn more of like what all these amazing studios and individuals have done. And with that, I release the history and let's go over to the story. So thank you very much. And I can't wait to see all the amazing work we're going to see tonight.